Hello and welcome to the Cool Grandpa Podcast. This is your host Greg Payne coming at you from Studio 12. This podcast is about being the best possible grandpa you can be, focusing on what it is to be a grandpa and how we can all share that experience together for our grandchildren. Hi, and welcome to this edition of the Cool Grandpa Podcast. I'd like to introduce you to Charles Pineo. Charles was raised in Maine and achieved the rank of Eagle Scout in 1961. He attended Dartmouth College in 1969, achieved a degree in geology, and was a member of the Dartmouth Ski Team, Dartmouth Outing Club, and the Dartmouth Mountaineering Club. In 1971, he married Linda Baker and then attended Stanford University. In 1973, he had earned a Master's of Science degree in Earth Sciences and then earned an MBA in 1975. Charles and Linda both adopted their first daughter in 1981 and adopted their son in 1988. Also in 1988, Linda was ordained a priest in the Episcopal Church. Charles has spent time in and out of the country working on different engineering and software projects, and in 2004 went into semi-retirement, then went into teaching high school as a special education teacher from 2005 to 2017. Charles' son had earned his Eagle badge in 2008, and in 2010, Ryan, the first grandson, was born, and then Riley came along in 2015. Over the years, Charles has spent a lot of time in the outdoors and a lot of time doing canoeing trips and doing all sorts of camping and outdoor recreation. Over the past few years, while being in Atlanta, he's been a member of the Atlanta Area Council and has been an aquatics instructor since 2001. He's been on Scout Reach committees from 2008 until present, and health and safety committees from 2007 to the present. It's safe to say that scouting and the outdoors has had a big impact on Charles' life. He has been using those outdoor experiences and skills to teach and help raise his two grandsons. So without further ado, we'll go ahead and jump into our conversation. Hope you guys enjoy. Charles, as we get started with our conversation this evening, I'd love for you to be able to share the experience that you first had when you learned to be a grandfather. I've been talking to a bunch of different grandfathers, and the ranges of emotions have been, oh boy, and I'm not ready for this, to, boy, I've been ready for this for a long time. So if you don't mind, share the experience that you had when you first heard the news you were going to be a grandfather for the first time.
Well, sure. It did come as a surprise. Our daughter was not married, so she's a single mom to this day. And all of a sudden, we found out that she was expecting. And so we went through all of the concerns and excitement of looking at a single mom who was probably not able to support herself. And there were various options that were kind of out there that we considered, and ultimately we decided that we'd be able to support her and the child as best we could and as best they needed, and that's what happened. So she came to live with us. He was a preemie. He was born 2 months early.
Oh, wow.
And that was exciting in itself. Certain complications, but he got through it okay, and he's now at least as tall as, if not taller than most of his peers. And he caught up on the charts within the first year. So fortunately, I guess his biological dad, and we haven't met really, and his mom are both big people. So he got some big genes. They took over from the 2 months early to get him on track within about 9 months. And so they've lived with us pretty much the whole time. He's 10 now. So it's been an adventure.
Oh, I bet.
It's worked.
Oh, that's fantastic. It's, I can just hear it's been a blessing and quite an experience having Ryan join the family. So that's wonderful.
Oh yeah, and we've tried to give him and his younger brother as much of or as many opportunities as they can have as on a day by day, week to week, month to month basis, and get them in a good place. And they may stay with us until they're out of the house, or they may find a better opportunity, and mom may find a better opportunity, and they may move. But for the moment, everybody's under my roof. So the empty nester stuff, I say that's for amateurs. I packed my house. I got grandkids and kids living under my roof.
Oh, that's wonderful though. It's a great opportunity, I think, too. It's not so much of a do-over, but it's definitely one of these things where you get an opportunity to do things a little bit differently with the grandkids than maybe you had a chance with the children.
Oh yeah, we certainly are not in the category of missing our grandkids.
Sure.
Uh, quite the opposite. They are here all the time. It's a matter of tag who's got what meal and what day and which of the activities, and we make it work.
Oh, that's awesome. Now, Charles, one of the items that really piqued my interest and something that I was reaching out to the GCA or Georgia Canoe Association Facebook page, and appreciate you responding to this question, was getting grandchildren interested in some of our hobbies, paddle sports, whether it's whitewater kayaking or canoeing or just some of our hobbies in general, and what kind of a bond that develops with us. And I know reading from your bio that you're outdoors quite often, earning, Eagle Scout in 1961, being on the Dartmouth ski team. And I mean, outdoors and you just seem to go together. And I was wanting to know a little bit about how you're starting to introduce Ryan and Riley into some of your outdoor activities, and how does that work for you?
Well, for Ryan, who is now 10, we've been doing outdoorsy things all along, but in terms of setting the hook and getting some skills, we put him into swim lessons about the age of 4. And his younger brother is right there now, and we're hoping to get him into lessons later this summer. Ryan, we hope to get back into lessons. We try to get him in the pool for a few weeks every year just to work on skills and improve his strokes. Now he's one of the few kids his age in his Cub Scout pack who can swim 100 yards. So he learned to swim kind of in spite of himself starting at the age of 4. And then as things develop, I spent most of my younger days, summers at least, with my cousins from Canada who came down, stayed at our family's camp in Maine. And so we played together and swam together and boated together and fished together all of our younger days. Hadn't really seen each other for years. Ran into my first cousin, or one of my first cousins, at my dad's funeral, and she was telling me about her outdoor adventures, and we decided to do a family canoe trip. 2000, what was it, 16, I guess it was. Ryan was 6. Turns out he'd never met him, but he has 2 cousins in Canada. One's about a week younger. So we had 2 6-year-olds, a 7-year-old, and a 4-year-old. And we arranged a guided canoe trip way up in the northern end of Ontario. And Ryan and I drove up and met our cousins in Cochrane, Ontario, and took the train in halfway and got off at a flag stop and unloaded the canoes and all the food and gear and the guides and everybody along. And off we went on the river for a few days. And we'd all talked about practicing, camping out in the backyard.
Right.
And maybe even learning how to poop in the woods. But of course, we all got up there and we hadn't done that. So first day on the river was cold and dreary. We're paddling north toward Hudson Bay into a north wind. It was trying to rain. It was cold. It was miserable. And that night when we set up our tents, it was windy. We actually had to put big rocks in the tents just to get them to stay put while we put the poles on them.
Oh,
And
wow.
we got everybody dried off and had dinner and went to bed and got up the next morning, and the weather was a lot better. But we were on the river for about 5 days, camping every night, eating off campfires, and learning how to poop in the woods. And the boys did that. It's an interesting experience that you can go through with your kids. I won't bore you and your audience with it, but it's possible to teach your kid how to poop in the woods
Oh,
on
yeah.
the go.
Yep. Now,
And so we did that trip. Then he and I took a trip to eastern Quebec the following summer. Then he was 7. Again, he was just riding in the canoe like most of his peers were in those days. But he got the experience of paddling. He was the only adult in the group. I'm sorry, he was the only youth in the group. The youngest couple, I think, were in their late 30s. And I held my breath thinking, oh, this is going to be an adventure. He may not do it at all. Well, within 2 days, he knew everybody by their first name. They all knew him. And by the end of the trip, he and another one of the moms or women, or no other kids, were organizing our campfires for us. And it really went well. Everybody was most impressed with what a trooper he was. Every morning he got up, put on a wetsuit, put on his life jacket and his helmet, and got in the middle of the canoe, and off we went. And it was whitewater all the way for a week.
oh, wow.
And that
Wow.
was the Bonaventure River in Quebec, out in
Okay.
the Gaspé. We took a year off, and then we did a trip last summer on the Noir River, the Black River, in western Quebec. And again, the boys were older, and this time we planned specifically to have them begin paddling. So
Okay.
Ryan and I paddled together for 2 days on reasonably flat water, and then as we got into some of the rapids, we mixed it up, and every day the boys paddled with somebody different. And but they all got to try their hand at paddling in the bow on moving water. Some of the rapids we played in, and some of them we portaged, and some of them we went through, and it was all good fun.
Oh, that's fantastic. Now, I've got a question for you on the first river experience when it started out with the wind coming in your face and the rain and everything else. What was Ryan's? What was his demeanor like with that first trip? Was he kind of wondering, "Oh boy, what did Grandpa get me into on this one?"
All I remember is that he was cold.
Mm-hmm.
Hypothermia was part of the equation,
Okay.
and we got him into the tent and got him into dry clothes, and that was a big plus. Then I helped my cousins get her tent up, and then we all gathered for dinner, and with a warm meal under our belts and getting out of the weather in our tents, we settled down for the night. He'd never slept in a tent before, and he was asleep in about 2 minutes. We were sleeping on pads on the ground, basically, with a sleeping pad and a sleeping bag, and he went out like a light. So that was, we could check that one off. Definitely knows how
Right.
he has no problems sleeping on the ground in a tent.
That's fantastic. Now, when he was coming home during the off the expedition trips, I know that he's active and participates in Cub Scouts and even with his class associates. What was his experience like coming home from such a trip? I mean, most people might go to the beach or maybe Disney or an amusement park or something along those lines, but for a 7-year-old, he really had an adventure.
Oh yeah, at 6 and 7, my cousins and I both marveled at it because we grew up in the 50s, 60s, uh, and it was pretty much you left the house at the beginning of the day and you came home at the end of the day, and maybe you came home for lunch, and you fished, you threw rocks in the lake, you threw rocks in the river, you ran through the woods and played hide and seek, whatever. And he and his cousins, whom he had never met, struck it up together, and they played and played and played every day, with no particular guidance except stay away from the water, don't get in the moving water, and just had a blast. And it was just so much fun watching them have fun, making stuff up as they went. And yeah, they did a little bit of fishing, and they found things along the shore of the river, and they found things in the woods. So when he came home, he was always very excited about the trip. He was glad that he'd met his cousins that he'd never seen before on the first trip,
Sure.
and looking forward to doing it again. Well, the second trip was just him and me. And then the third trip last summer, we were all back together again, and everybody was 3 years older, and that made a big difference. The 4-year-old was now 7, and the 6-year-olds were 9, and the 7-year-old was 10.
Mm-hmm.
And they're more little people now than they were little kids when we took them on the first trip.
Right.
So they did better. They had a bigger adventure last summer just because they could appreciate it better. And they had their boy time in the tent. They're all boys. They had boy time in the tent. They were playing cards and games and all sorts of things. Good for them. And the adults did their thing, and the kids did their thing, and everybody had a good time.
Yeah. Now, what do you think that this kind of activity, and especially outdoor activities between grandfather and his grandson and cousins and everybody else, does for strengthening the family unit? Do you see positives in those types of experiences?
Oh yeah, I see the positives in the family unit, just between him and me, and also the broader family unit of the cousins. I mean, I grew up with my cousins. I don't know how common it is today to hang out with your cousins, but here he is hanging out with his cousins in Canada. Never met him before he was 6 years old. Only sees him on canoe trips, but they jump right in together like they've been together for years. They're all good friends now, and it's great to see that personal chemistry. I'm now hanging out with my cousin and her kids. Her kids are in their her son is in his early 40s, and I've gotten to know him well, and his wife, and she doesn't go on the trips, but he does. So we've got 3 generations on these trips, and it's fun.
Well, and specifically, how do you think this is also helping with just the bonding? I mean, obviously, you guys are in the same house, you're involved with the scouting activities, but then also this, I don't know, dedicated alone time, or dedicated, this is me and grandpa time, even though there are other family members, or on the other expedition that there were another group that was there. It was still, the two of you, it sounds like, driving up to Canada, and then the two of you coming back down. And so that was really a lot of grandpa-grandson time.
Oh yeah, there's a lot of driving time, and he's a trooper in the back seat. I'll tell you, he's got enough cables that he can attach himself to any source of electricity in the car, and he's clever enough to rearrange the shade if he needs it. And we don't use electronics on the trips. There's no point. There's no way to charge them. So all the electronics just stay in the car when we go on these trips. But when we're in the car traveling, I'm driving and he's entertaining himself, and we talk about the trip occasionally. And then depending on what's going on, I mean, coming back from that trip, the first trip, I wanted to do something meaningful. We were on our way to a wedding in Washington, D.C., coming back from Cochrane, Ontario, which is a full day drive north of Toronto. And I thought, what can I do with him that he might remember? And lo and behold, there's Niagara Falls. So I thought, well, you know what? We need to stop and do a boat tour of Niagara Falls. So we went down the Canadian side and found a tour boat and got on it and did the falls, and it was a great trip. And he wanted to do the zip line too. He was too young and too short, so
Yeah.
bummer on that. But I wanted to get back on the road because I had miles to cover.
Sure.
So that worked out pretty well for both of us. But he's a trooper. He really likes to do fun stuff, and zip lines. If he can get on them legally, he'll take a zip line by himself too. He's done a few, but there's not too many zip lines you can ride on when you're less than 75 pounds and under 9 years old.
Right.
But he's been on a few, and he'll go back for more if he can. So he likes adventure. He likes the outdoors. He looks forward to the next chance we can do something like that. And it suits him well in scouts because he has no problem at all, putting up his own tent now and sleeping in his own tent if he can,
Hmm.
or sharing a tent with somebody else his age. And a lot of the kids, they're just kind of getting close to setting up a tent on their own and sleeping in something smaller than a queen size mattress in the tent. And we always have slept in a kind of a 3-man backpacking tent. And the Cub Scouts that he hangs around with all like to come over and see the cute tent that Ryan and I are sleeping in, not realizing that if they get into Boy Scouts, they're going to be sleeping in those cute tents themselves because
Right.
they're going to have to carry them on their backs.
Have you seen a difference with him doing these activities with just confidence levels and even willingness to take risks? I mean, certainly not unhealthy risks, but extending himself, whether it's academically or in sports or other skills where, he's got that background of I've been on big rivers. I've been on, and these are big rivers for him. We're not
They're
talking.
big rivers for me.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's certainly got maturity that a lot of his friends don't have. He's not only from those trips, but also from scouts, but probably more of these trips. He's learned to interact with adults
Mm-hmm.
much more confidently and comfortably than the typical 7, 8, 9, 10-year-old will interact nowadays, in my experience. I mean, I see kids in his Cub Scout den who are very reluctant to speak up in a group setting, even among their peers. And Ryan is very comfortable, very confident, uh, interfacing with everybody, and just relishes the chance to, get up and say something or lead something or perform. And part of that he's gotten on these canoe trips where he has interacted not only with family, but in the case of our second trip together, a group of complete adult strangers.
Oh, that's fantastic. Now, one of the things I've always thought was that the more experiences, I mean, certainly outdoors that young people have, the more it starts to build that confidence level, and then especially when you're mixed different age groups together because everybody's in the same environment. You're not in, let's say, the second grade class, and you're only dealing with people within your class and maybe the teacher, but you're dealing with typically outdoors, you're dealing with people maybe your age, maybe a little bit younger, teenagers, adults of different ages. And certainly in those experiences, you do have to communicate with different people. I mean, for meal prep, for cleaning up, for safety, for just social interactions. If you want somebody to talk to over a couple of days, you have to talk with other people and learn how to communicate, and read people too. And so I think all those skills are extremely valuable. And, I love the fact that these are being shared and being passed down, these traditions of being outdoors with the family. Now, what would you suggest for new grandpas or younger grandpas where the kids are starting to get that age where they could go out and explore the outdoors or start to get into some of the hobbies that their grandfathers are in? What would be some of the things that you would want to share?
I think we've done this with our kids and with our grandchildren. We try to involve them in pretty much everything we do. We don't leave them behind that very much. We rarely leave them with babysitters. We go to restaurants as a family. We travel as a family. Growing up as a kid in Maine, uh, we always traveled as a family. My parents didn't split off and do a whole lot of things on their own. Uh, it was always a family thing that we did when we did things, and I think that's very important. I see a lot of families kind of dumping the kids and then coming back to get them later, uh, and I don't think that works well in the long term. I think you really need to involve, if you're going to have a family situation, you need to involve the family. And I grew up in a family where golf was something my mom's mother played in the early 1900s, and she played it very well. But my mom and dad didn't play golf very much. I mean, they whacked the ball around once in a while, but it wasn't something we did. And in my career, golf was never anything that was something important related to my job. So I still don't play golf. I've been on a golf course a few times. I'm dangerous, and I like best ball because I can always put it down where somebody else actually hit it. But golf isn't part of my vocabulary. Mountain climbing, rock climbing, canoeing, kayaking, outdoor stuff is what I do. And now that I'm retired and spending a lot of time with the Scouts, uh, my main area of expertise is aquatics, and that can be boats, it can be swimming, it can be life saving. But all of that comes from my days as a young scout in the late 50s and early 60s. And I left scouting at the age of 16. I didn't come back into it until my son was old enough to get into scouts here in the mid 1990s when we moved to the Atlanta area. So I have a big gap in my scouting. A lot of the fellows that I work with and some of the moms I work with in scouting have been in scouting for years continuously since they were kids, not the moms, but the dads. And I mean, they got 40, 50, 60 years in scouting, some of them. So good for them. But I think it's an important program, and it fits well with, my personal interests. And it fits well for Ryan right now, and hopefully his brother, that, we can kind of tag team personal interests and then do the same sorts of things in scouting, but maybe with a broader base of activities. Still get the adult association, still get the skills, still get the values that I think are important.
Well, and do you find too that with the introduction of the hobby and whether it's aquatics or anything else, that do you think that there's value in, I don't know, lack of a better word, maybe dumbing down or scaling it back? I mean, certainly you don't take a 5-year-old, and go do some serious rock climbing, but at the same time, you may want to go ahead and introduce them just as they were another participant, where safety and everything else is taken into consideration.
Well, everything we do has to be safe, and I take guided trips in Canada partly for that reason. The guides bring that extra layer of safety, they bring the equipment, and they bring the training, plus the local knowledge that I wouldn't have if I just showed up some rental agency and rented a canoe and packed a bunch of gear in a canoe and off I went. So, safety is always important. But by participating in these programs, both I and my grandson are kind of wrapped up in the logistics and the safety of what we're doing. So, same thing in scouting. You learn by doing, but you learn by doing it safely. In scouting, we have something called the Guide to Safe Scouting.
Yes.
And it's a 100+ page document of things you can and cannot do and how you can do them safely, if you can do them. And it's an important document. It's always in flux because there are, things learned and lessons learned. But that's part of the underlying fabric, the foundation of the program is being able to enjoy these things safely. And if you do and you're successful, then you can pass that on to others. So you're not only doing it yourself, but at some point, you're learning skills that you can then teach to others.
Yeah, and I think it's important to always maintain that experience with safety, but then also have the kids feel like they're pushing the bounds a little bit. Certainly with the I don't know, the supervision of whether it's a guide or the adults or whatnot. But I think there's something to it where the outdoors especially comes into play, where the sudden thunderstorm, the sudden change in the weather, a different kind of exposure that then creates this
falling out of a
idea.
canoe in the rapids.
Oh, absolutely, and making it through it, and then boy, that youth has now grown in experience and confidence, and they've done it in
You learn
a safe manner.
you learn why the equipment is important. Uh, the helmet, for example. I mean, you see people all the time doing whitewater without a helmet. You won't see me doing that,
No.
and I hope you won't see Ryan doing it because the consequences could be terminal. Uh, Life jacket, same thing. I mean, I can't tell you how many pictures of people I've seen without life jackets or life jackets that are open. Don't do you any good if you don't have them on and properly fastened. So, we don't go anywhere without them. And
Exactly.
hopefully that'll stick with him. And when I'm no longer around to check, hopefully he'll be smart enough to put it on and wear it properly like he's been taught as a young kid.
Yep. Now, have you had any feedback or started to hear any stories, either from your wife or Ryan's mom or other people about just how impactful these trips have been and the time that you spend with Ryan as far as, boy, Grandpa let me do this and we did this and, in forming those special memories, because I know in my past, these types of activities, these are still with me today. The lessons learned, camping with my grandfather or doing some of these other activities, even at 7, 8, 9 years old, I still remember them. And I'm curious to know if you get a little bit of that feedback, how important these things are for Ryan and Riley.
Well, not yet Riley, but Ryan certainly looks forward to the next trip. I know that. I've been able to take him out on a couple of camping trips with the venturing group. This is the older co-ed scouts, ages 14 to 20. And I'm involved in that actually more than I am in the Boy Scouts or Cub Scouts or Scouts BSA. And he and I went camping with a venturing crew last September. It was just a one-night camp out. But I have pictures of him sitting by the campfire with a, I don't know, 16, 17-year-old trying to teach him how to play the guitar. And the next day we went stand-up paddleboarding. And because he'd already been in a canoe the year before, he knew how to hold the paddle and knew what it did. And he did quite well on that stand-up paddleboard all by himself, going down the lake with the 15, 16, 17-year-old teenagers and coming back. So, I see it as a set of skills that he's already got on board that allow him to participate, if you will, with a much older group of kids and do it on an equal basis. We've all, totally aside, we've also had him in Taekwondo for several years now. And just last week, he passed his test for the 2nd degree black belt. So we see that program complement scouting in terms of the values and so forth that go with the Taekwondo program. So that's a nice fit as well. But again, he in Taekwondo, he's again interfacing, even as an instructor, with a wide range of ages, both children younger than he is and up to high school age students in the school. And here he is helping teach kids that are several years older than he is, and he does it without really thinking about it. So we're very proud of that.
Oh, wow. Well, and he's got to be getting, and I know we've been talking over it, but just those experiences on the canoe trips and everything that you're exposing him to with your interests, but then also the scouts and outdoor activities has got to just keep feeding that self-assurance and that confidence in a positive way where he can interact and he can teach people that are older than him, because that's a tough skill and tough to do when you're younger. I mean, it gets easier as we get older, but certainly for 10-year-olds trying to teach a skill to a 12-year-old or a 13 or 14-year-old, that gets to be a really different dynamic at those ages. So,
Yeah, indeed it does. And also, thinking back, he was one of the few Cub Scouts in his pack that the adults would trust to go with them camping or on a weekend outing without me there.
mm,
Most of the younger boys, 7, 8 year old, really need mom or dad there, usually dad, but not always, just to, keep the comfort level high enough so that they can, sleep through the night in the tent or, do whatever it is they need to do. And yet,
sure.
in Ryan's case, his behavior was such that he was, a well-behaved kid, and the other adults were not. There was no hesitation. Like, yeah, if I couldn't go, Ryan could still go because the scout rules allowed it, and the adults on the other end, the other dads, were perfectly willing to have him tag along and share a tent with their kid.
Oh, that's fantastic. And I want to honor the time, and we're coming up towards the end here. And as we end the program, I always enjoy asking the guests for a favorite memory that they have of their grandfathers, or a favorite memory or experience that they have as being a grandfather. And if you have something you'd love to share with us, I'd really like to hear it.
Well, I still remember vividly a fishing trip I went on with my grandfather. This was my father's father. We lived in the same town in coastal Maine where he had retired in 1940 or 41. And I was in the 8th grade. So this was probably, I don't know, how old in the 8th grade? 13. So it was probably about 1960. And we went up to the Moosehead Lake area in Maine. We went into a little camp that he knew about, proper fishing camp with a dining room and boats to rent and so forth. And we rode around in these 2 lakes that were nearby, and there were no outboard motors allowed. And we fished, and I learned a lot on that trip, just hanging out with my grandfather. Dad wasn't particularly an outdoorsman. I mean, he did a little bit of fishing and stuff, but my grandfather was the real outdoorsman. So that particular trip really stuck in my memory. I mean, I saw a moose. I got eaten alive by mosquitoes. Probably caught a few fish. Don't really remember that part, but I had a good time. And obviously, here I am a few years later, still remember it. And so I have to hope that Ryan's experiences with me will, at least some of them will stick with him, like that experience that I had with my grandfather.
Oh, I'm sure they will. And, it just goes to prove once again just how impactful grandfathers can be. And even when it's some experiences that are as simple as going out camping and fishing, these are the moments that we still remember 30, 40 plus years down the road. It's just that experience of being with granddad and having that time with them, moments to share, and moments that also just to act as an example of how we want to be as grandfathers ourselves, and the moments that we want to pass on to our grandchildren. So thank you so much for sharing that with us.
Oh, you're very welcome. I've enjoyed it.
Thank you for listening to the Cool Grandpa Podcast. If you've enjoyed this episode, please do me a favor and share it with a friend. That's the best way you can help us to expand our community, as well as get the news out about how valuable grandpas are in the lives of those kids. If you'd like to leave me a comment or shoot me a potential topic for this podcast, please go to www.cool-grandpa.us. Look for the comments tab, fill it out, hit submit. It's as easy as that. Until next time, remember to stay cool.